Happy Advent, gentlemen. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for continuing to support my little project here. As of this recording, today is Sunday, the Sunday of Christmas week. We are coming up on the climax of this wonderful season. I don't think Kansas is going to get any snow. It's a abnormally warm week this week, so maybe next month. We'll see. But I hope you guys are getting lots of time that you're spending with your family, your friends, your loved ones. And I got to confess something to you guys. I was really bad this morning. I hope you guys have all been going to services. It's a beautiful time of year to go to a church service. Usually, churches go crazy on Christmas. They're putting out all kinds of beautiful decorations. The services oftentimes are above and beyond the bread and butter. They really try hard this time of year. So it is, and I know my church has put out some beautiful decorations. They did for Thanksgiving as well. The reds and oranges and yellows, and now we've got poinsettias everywhere and garland and all the beautiful decorations. And of course it's about a lot more than just that superficial thing, but get to church unlike I did this morning. I've been on call this week and I have been not sleeping very much. So I was very bad and gave in to my weakness this morning. But I hope you're being better than I am, and I try to get there most Sundays. And this series is about making sure you are better than me than I was today by going to church, because we need it, man. We need that guidance. We need the community. We need the sacraments. We need it all. So last week we began talking about my personal background as far as, and to recap real quick, I grew up in a Christian home, baptized really young, began to stray in college. In my Army years, I continued to stray even further. Never quite went all the way. I never quite threw the faith all the way off, but for many years, I was not regularly attending church like I had been growing up under my parents' home. And it wasn't until I finished my time in the Army and came back home that a friend of mine from high school learned I was in town and invited me to church. And I started off getting involved with his small group first, to kind of get comfortable and meet some more people. And then I met my wife, and the two of us, so she wasn't a believer at the time, and I was barely a believer. But over time, as our relationship found some good footing, a key part of that good footing is we realized, man, we are not living how we should. I think we need to get back to taking this faith thing seriously. So started attending my buddy's church, and for about a year, we were going to that church, just building the habit, being consistent with going. And at some point, I caught the bug. I don't know to this day, that's for God to know. I don't know if I was just straying from the path for a while, or if I really only truly became a Christian recently, within the last couple years. But I began to read the Bible again, and it felt like I was reading it for the first time. Passages I knew growing up, I had read over time and time again, were like brand new all of a sudden, and I could not get enough. And so I started looking online. I wanted people to explain to me, not just my church, but I wanted to know because I knew there were other Christians out there. So I wanted to know why is there so many different types of churches? Why are there so many different types of Christians? Does it really matter? Do you just go and pick one that feels good? Or is there a reason that people believe the different things? And that led me to a very particular individual who I'm going to give a shout out to. I'm going to give a shout out here to a few individuals, but that young man is Richard Ackerman, aka Redeemed Zoomer. And as I was taking a nosedive back into the faith, I found his channel. I can't even remember what the first video was. It might have been like his books of the Bible. But I loved his goofy style of drawing everything in like Microsoft Paint. All these eye-catching, goofy things that he does. I describe him as like Christianity 101. So if you are someone who has never really known a lot about Christianity, or you're a Christian, but you've never really known much about church history or the finer points of theology, and especially the differences, the basic differences between the different Christian traditions or denominations, give him a try, man. He's, I think, pretty entertaining. You may not agree with him. He's a very dedicated Presbyterian, and many Presbyterians disagree with him because he is PC USA, and we'll get into what that is another day. But he's a part of a denomination that has gone through a lot of trouble these last few decades. But he is trying to turn that around, and I think it is a very noble effort. Anyways, I learned a lot from him, and from him, I got into a couple other people. So the church that I was attending was a Baptist church, part of the Southern Baptist Convention. And I was curious what some other pastors, I had wonderful pastors over me. They definitely had a good team there. But I wanted to know, was it the same everywhere or was it different? So I began to follow a pastor who is sadly no longer with us. And he played a huge part in helping me and my wife find a lot of answers that we couldn't always find at the church that we were going to, and just kind of added to what we were already getting where we were going. And he is Voddie Baucham, and we lost him back this September, so pray for him and his family. He's, I'm sure, doing better than any of the rest of us down here, but he was a warrior. He was a titan in the faith. If you're a Warhammer 40K fan like I am, bet you didn't expect to hear about Warhammer in a video about going to church. But I kind of looked up to him like a guardsman might look up to a space marine, or maybe a space marine up to their Primarch. But it really felt like I was looking at a giant. And even though I ultimately came to disagree with him on some of the finer theological points, I would enter a trench with that man any day. To this day, I still watch his stuff and always am learning more and taking more away. And the world is certainly a little darker without him. But anyways, I also started listening to Gavin Ortlund. And Gavin Ortlund, I have some pretty significant political differences with, but the man is highly intelligent. He is probably the most academic Baptist I have ever personally come to know. I don't know him personally, just following him online, but read a couple of his books, or really listened to. But he introduced me to something called Theological Triage, which we're going to come back to here in just a minute. Trent Horn and the Catholic Answers crew, phenomenal organization. I love those guys. I love Trent Horn. I learned about him through Gavin Ortlund because the two of them actually have a very good working relationship. And also Redeemed Zoomer talks about all these guys and more, including the next one that I'm going to mention. We'll talk about why I didn't decide to go Catholic or Orthodox another day. But Trent Horn is a wonderful apologist, not just for the Christian faith, but for his specific tradition as well, the Roman Catholic Church. So give him a try. All these people I'm going to reference their channels down below. So please check them out. Pastor Matthew Everhard of the PC USA. So he is a Presbyterian, but of a different denomination than Redeemed Zoomer. And the two of them have done a couple videos together. I think they're on pretty good terms. They have some strong disagreements on a couple things, but they are very, very similar in their theology. They have a way more common ground than they do differences, and they're very respectful, good brothers in Christ. Redeemed Zoomer's going to seminary right now, so be in prayer for him as well. So he is officially taking that upon himself. And then I get into some Lutherans. So Dr. Jordan B. Cooper, wonderful Lutheran minister of the AALC, the Association of American Lutheran Churches, I think is what they're called. They're a small denomination that is in full communion with the LCMS. I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep these shorter. And I'm watching the clock run up. It's making me nervous, so I'm getting ahead of myself. But Dr. Jordan Cooper, and then pastors Bryan Wolfmueller and Will Whedon. All those are phenomenal men. I love all three to this day. The latter two are LCMS pastors. The first one belongs to the AALC. We're all in full communion. So They are teachers of mine from a distance. So, of course, I submit to the church that I go to. You know, I'm taught by my pastor first. But after that, I really enjoy listening to these gentlemen. And they had a big role to play, all three of them, in my wife and I's ultimate decision to become Lutherans. So, what's the reason? Why did I go, after all these years, growing up Baptist, evangelical, you know, and after years astray, coming back into the church, attending a Baptist church with a good friend of mine that I had grown up with? Why leave? Why make that change? Well, Gavin Ortlund talks about theological triage, which is the idea that, and he's not the first one to coin this idea, maybe that particular phrase, but not this idea. And he admits so himself, and he's very open about that and honest. But it's the idea that there are different tiers, different ranks. If you ever seen a tier list, this is that kind of idea of doctrine. Some are more important. So the very top tier, that would be stuff that you cannot disagree on and call yourself a Christian. So believing that Christ is God would be in that tier. You can call it the Christian essentials. You can call it, you know, I'm trying to think of the biblical term off the top of my head. Objects or topics of first importance. I'm screwing that up. But it has a root in the New Testament where Paul talks about, you know, some things are of first importance, other things are of second importance or later importance. That's about as deep as he gets into it. So this is kind of a continuation of that idea. And the next tier down is where you get the differences between the denominations. So this is some big topics like the sacraments or the ordinances. If you're an evangelical, you might call them ordinances. Or you might not call them anything. You might not know really what they are, which is part of the reason why I started looking elsewhere. You get how your church is governed. So something like the Roman Catholic Church thinks it's quite necessary to have not just apostolic succession, but that clear hierarchy of bishops. Whereas someone like a Baptist, like I was, you're much more plugged into, you put pretty much all your time and effort into your local church. You're a congregational church government. So you might associate with others in your region, or you might even associate with the SBC or something like it. But ultimately, all the power is down at the local level. And then you got a couple systems in between. So that kind of is in that second tier as well. And there's a couple other things, but this tier is like things that are going to affect how you understand major doctrines that don't determine whether or not you're a Christian. So it would be like you and I having a different understanding on, does baptism save? Is Christ truly present in the Eucharist or in communion? That kind of thing. And then the other tiers are the lesser things that really, some people would only put maybe one more tier. I like 4 tiers because I think tier 3 should be things that are still important, but you can have differences within a congregation, but it doesn't really justify going and looking for another church. And then the bottom tier is like all the stuff that's like, it might be fun to talk about. It might even be kind of important, but you are absolutely never justified. If you have enough of those like third tiers that are giving you trouble, maybe it's worth possibly looking into going elsewhere. But anyways, so I got introduced to this idea of theological triage. And that became a very key part when I made the decision to start looking at other churches, because I had never really gone through that process myself. I attended a couple churches in college, but I didn't make a deliberate effort to try to find one to attend, to submit to. And so this was really my first experience. And I had a couple experiences in the church that I was in where, as I was reading the Bible and reading, especially over 1 Corinthians 11, that really gets into, Paul is laying into the Corinthian church because they're abusing the Eucharist. They are being all kinds of chaotic. Some people are eating all the bread, drinking all the wine. Others are going without and are starving. people are being rowdy, and Paul is losing his mind. And basically telling them they're lucky that he's not there in person because it might be temple table flipping part 2. So he gets into, and he gives them a warning. This is the thing that really stuck out to me. He warns people against, if you do not approach this with reverence, if you do not examine yourself before partaking of this holy meal, it is as if you were guilty of murdering our Lord yourself. Says, uses the terminology, you drink and eat judgment upon yourself. And that is not a place that you want to be. So I began to wonder, this is pretty strong language. I know other churches are not just doing this more frequently, but they have some different beliefs on what this is. So I really started to dig into that. And it really started to bother me because we were the type of church that maybe did it once a quarter, maybe on maybe an extra special occasion. So really 5 or 6 times a year is all we were doing for communion. And that kicked off the whole thing. There was also, my wife and I decided to go ahead and get baptized. Who we are now, we probably would not have gotten rebaptized now that we're Lutherans with a Lutheran understanding. But at the time, we didn't know because she had been baptized as a child, so had I, but neither one of us had records of it. And she had strayed far, I had strayed far, and we just wanted to be sure. So we wanted to do it while we were adults, and we had record of it, and we knew we meant it, all that stuff. And now I have a different understanding of baptism, which determined why we had my son baptized. But anyways, so when I went to get baptized, we had a little class that we took beforehand, and they introduced us to something called the Apostles' Creed. Well, I went and studied the Apostles' Creed, and they explained how this is a thing that Christians had done for a long time. You know, they would recite this creed, affirming what they believed, and it has basically the gospel in a nice, neat package. And I loved that idea of this thing that connected me to the church. I'm sorry, I'm going to go a little longer on this video. I was trying to hit 15 minutes, but I really want to get this wrapped up, and then we'll start trimming it back down again as we get into the actual search process. So my goal is to keep it between 10 and 15 minutes. I know I've been horrible about that up to this point, but I get excited, I get talking. I know my channel name's kind of ironic because of all that. Anyways, so the Apostles' Creed. So my Baptist pastor that was going to baptize us introduced this to us, like, got us all excited about it. And then when I asked him, hey, I know typically in the baptisms, you give people a second to say something about themselves or give a little brief, speech of, their confession of faith or like how they came to faith or how they've come to that moment. And I was like, would you be okay if we recited the Apostles' Creed? I read over it. I thought it was solid. I didn't see anything doctrinally wrong with it. And he went, no, better not. And I was like, are you serious? He's like, yeah. He kind of played it like it was in the interest of time. But when I still ultimately got to say something beforehand, that was probably about the same amount of time it would have taken to recite this creed. That's another thing that really began to irritate me and ate at me. So we went through with the baptism. My wife and I just read the creed aloud to each other in the car before we went into church that morning. And that was I love this pastor this day. I'm so grateful. It was wonderful to have him baptize us, and he's the same one that married us. I love this man. They have done many wonderful things, but that one really bothered me. I'm not going to lie, which that's going to happen at times, but add that. Okay, so I'm not just having an issue with communion. Now I'm having an issue with how we do baptism. And as I began to really do a deep dive onto the subject, I didn't think it was going to happen in this way. The first thing I thought I wanted was I just wanted to participate in communion more. I just thought it was a good practice to do it a little more. And that led into me thinking, well, maybe there's a little bit more going on. So I kind of started to gravitate towards the kind of the Presbyterian view of it, of like the spiritual presence. But baptism, as I did, I'm like, I want to read everything in the Bible that has to do with baptism and really study the topic. Quickly became convinced of baptismal regeneration. I was like, I don't think I've ever read these particular passages before, and now I don't think I can ever unread it the way that I now understand it. And that cracked open the door for not just, okay, if I believe baptism saves, I know the ones that typically believe baptism saves also baptize their babies. I got to reassess here. This is some very significant issues. So those two big issues really pushed me into the like, okay, I need to start looking at some other churches. And I just was curious. I was like, I've never really been to other churches. I attended a Catholic church a couple of times with a buddy of mine, but I'd never really done a search for myself. I'd never been to like a Presbyterian or a Lutheran church. And even if I didn't commit there, I just want to know what was it like? What do they believe? So I really began to focus on the 2, 3, 4 major traditions I wanted to dig into. So I really started to study up on my sacramentology, which is in that second, this is all in that second tier. So as I began to rack up things that I was taking issue with the church I was a part of that were all in that tier, I was like, okay, I got to find a better fit. One of the options at the beginning of this, I was talking to my small group as we were doing this, and they were trying to, wonderful young men that, brothers in Christ, they were trying to kind of help me a little bit with this. But I told them, I was like, listen, this is not because I'm angry. This is not because I have some grudge against this. Some things have started to bother me as I've gotten back into the faith, and I think there just might be a better fit out there. We may commit and become official members of this church. And if we do, that's it. We're not doing this wishy-washy church hopping routine. But I can't do that in good conscience without looking at these other churches first and really digging into whether or not that would be more in line with my convictions, with my wife and I's convictions at this point. So the search began. And we started off with kind of the more familiar, and it went Reformed Baptist. So there's 1 or 2 churches here in town that are more... The church I had been attending is very much... this gets into the next issue I'm going to talk about. It's very much the standard Southern Baptist church. I don't really know how to explain it either more than that. There's very, very standard Baptist. Well, there's other churches that adhere to the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith, and which brings up the topic of confessions, which became the next big thing that really started to grab my attention. Some churches... so we started off with those, and that were more kind of historic, because that goes further back. So today's Baptists are very recent. And if you're a Baptist and you disagree with me, I'm sorry. But I don't think the average Baptist realizes how different today's Baptist churches are from not just all of Christian history, but how different they are from Baptists of our own background. The Baptist Church in America today, under the Southern Baptist Convention, has drifted a long ways from Baptists when they first became a thing, back in the 1600s, or whenever the official roots were. You don't believe me? Go and read the 1689 and come back to me and tell me how much of that sounds like the teachings that you're getting on Sunday. Do you accept the spiritual presence in communion? Do you believe... I can't remember off the top of my head if they actually teach baptismal regeneration or not. I think not quite, if I remember. It's like up close to it. It's like very close, but not quite. Anyways, if you don't know what a confession is, think of it like a confession of faith is to a church how the Constitution is to a country, to the United States. It's the founding documents, and generally a confession is going to apply across an entire tradition, an entire body of churches. It's a statement of faith on steroids. And currently the SBC is under, they do have a confession, but it's the 2000 Baptist Faith and Message. And in my opinion, I went and read it. It doesn't take very long. It just reads like almost any other statement of faith at any other church. Barely longer. That's not to say that length determines the value of a confession, but I was just left wanting when I read it. I was like, man, this is weak sauce, man. Not to mention, this is like supposed to be a key cornerstone of our tradition, and I have never heard it mentioned ever in any sermon ever. And meanwhile, if you're a Presbyterian or a Lutheran and you're doing it right, you should be bringing up your confessions all the time. And then I just, because there's that disconnect that I just talked about, where like, not only is it its own thing from most of Christian history, it breaks a lot of norms that have existed since the beginning, since Christ himself. Today's Baptist churches in the United States are so disconnected with history, and it just eats at me, and it ate at me at the beginning of this. And then the church I went to, I will give them a good point. I think they had a good accountability system for what they were. It wasn't just like the pastor and he's the king of the church. They had a council of elders that had real power, and he had to answer to them. So he led the church, and he led this group of elders, but they had the power to call him out when he was going out in left field, which he never did. He was pretty solid. But he had this good accountability system. And I won't waste any more time. I've already gone long enough. But ultimately, what drew me on these different issues to the Lutheran Church is they had sacramentology that I came to love. And for a long time, I was really considering the Reformed Church. And it came down to even when my wife and I were making that final decision, it was between a Reformed church and a Lutheran church that we really liked and responded to and felt very well received at both places. And I was of the mindset, I was like, listen, I like things with both. Ultimately, again, this may not be a perfect reason, but it came down to, we were like, the church that we decide is the one that we need to be in. I'm just going to submit to whatever their teaching is on the finer points of things. We've studied the Bible and let our consciences, as we've read, lead us to a certain point. But the finer details of, is it spiritual presence, or is Christ truly present in, with, and under the bread and wine? I'm just going to submit to whichever church we decide to go to. And I'm going to trust hundreds of years of tradition and teaching and these leaders that have developed these bodies of doctrine. I'm going to trust that they know what they're talking about more than me. So the sacramentology with the Lutheran Church is chef kiss. Baptism saves. Christ is present in the Eucharist. Arguably, confession is a third sacrament. I personally am on team third sacrament, but that's another thing for another day. The Augsburg Confession blows the 2000. Of course, now I believe it blows any other confession out of the water. Not necessarily blows them out of the water, but it's my personal favorite confession. The Book of Concord is a thick tome that has a collection of the Lutheran confessions all in one place. And they have the creeds, so they officially affirm the creeds. There's another thing that bothered me about the SBC. So the SBC decided, it's not that we're condemning the Nicene Creed, but we don't want to officially incorporate it into the SBC's official doctrines. We're just going to let people follow their consciences on that. And that disturbed me too, because I personally believe if you can't at least agree with all the doctrines in the Nicene Creed, you are not a Christian. I think that is a key tool that we can use. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect filter, but it's a good tool as like a rule, with maybe a couple exceptions. But anyways, Lutheran Church accepts the creeds. The LCMS, in listening to the case that Redeemed Zoomer gives and reading about Christ's call for unity in the Gospel of John, I felt more drawn to a main line. And LCMS has a rare thing that it can brag about. Back in the 70s, the conservatives won. So conservatives in churches have a bad habit of running away when the going gets tough, when there's a big conservative liberal. And we're talking theologic, not political here. Basically more whether or not you take the Bible as an authoritative infallible text or not. And in the LCMS, unlike every other main line in the United States, the conservatives won. So there's a couple issues, there's a couple gripes I do have with the LCMS. You know, they're not perfect, but I don't think any church is perfect. Hot take. But overall, they had the most good, I thought. And I liked that the conservatives actually stood their ground and won. And that gave me hope for the future, as a couple other things have come up. But great sacramentology, strong reforms. I like that they're connected to a larger body. So they're still pretty congregational. So it's not, typically an LCMS church gets to call their own pastor. So the synod will train the pastors in seminary, and they kind of help with some government of the church overall. But the congregation gets a good amount of power. So you still kind of have a little bit of that SBC type style where we're calling our pastor. It's not really one that's assigned to us, but I like that it was at least more connected than the SBC is to a larger organization. And Lutheran Church, and I'll kind of wrap this up because this is going way too long. The Lutheran Church, of all the churches that came out of the Protestant Reformation, the main three, so Reformed, Anglican, and Lutheran, the Lutherans were one of the most conservative. So that means you preserve a lot of those church traditions. You know, Lutherans, they draw their heritage to the church fathers. They don't believe that we're breaking from the Catholic Church. We believe we are the Catholic Church, cleansed by the gospel when we began to stray too far. We can get into those. I know if you're Catholic and you're listening to me, you think I'm freaking crazy right now, but I thought that was beautiful. I love that they continue a lot of the traditions, the liturgical calendar, all that. So I'm rambling at this point. I've gone on way too long, but so those are a few of the things that bothered me about where I was, and those are a few of the things, on the other hand, that attracted me to the Lutheran Church. And we'll get into more details on the specifics another day. But that was my journey. Thank you guys for listening. I know I ramble like an old man, but it means a lot to you guys that give me the time of day to share a little bit. And I'm going to get better at this thing. I know these videos are rough right now, but I'm just starting out. You know, they're basically unedited. But we're going to get there one day. And I just can't think of a good ending, so I'm just going to say thank you. Please check out the description. I'm going to put a lot of the things that I talked about, mostly the channels, the people that affected me in my church search, down below. And looking forward to next week, I am going to start getting into the actual process that I use. So I'll share kind of my procedure that I had, like how I made a list, how I made decisions, all that. And we're going to work on being more concise. So we're going to work on cutting to the chase. But thank you guys. God bless you. Merry Christmas. We're saying Merry Christmas again. Thank God. But you guys have a wonderful day. Yeah. I better stop talking, but